"You don't call the shots around here anymore," my daughter-in-law said, sitting right there at my own kitchen table. I just smiled. In that exact moment, I realized something. If you're planning to take over my house, you'd better double-check whose name is actually on the deed. "You don't call the shots around here anymore," Vanessa whispered, a smug little smirk spreading across her face as she sat down at my kitchen table. In that exact moment, I knew the peaceful years in my own home were officially over unless I did something about it right then. This storm had been brewing for months, honestly. Ever since the day my son, Austin, showed up on my doorstep with her and a mountain of luggage because their apartment lease had fallen through, bit by bit. Vanessa had been taking over the place. She banished my personal decor to the basement and started talking to me like I was just an annoying, unwanted guest in my own four walls. But I didn't feel anger, and I didn't cry. All I felt was a cold, crystal clear certainty washing over me. Austin just sat there next to her, staring glued to his phone, completely silent, his usual move whenever his wife showed her claws. To Vanessa, I was just a lonely older widow they could use as a free babysitter and maid while she ran the show. She thought she held all the cards because I adored my grandson and she was the mother. What she completely underestimated, though, was my ability to quietly watch, listen, and analyze a situation. I didn't argue with her. I didn't even raise my voice. Instead, I picked up my coffee mug, poured the rest of it down the sink, and looked at her calmly. This house was entirely in my name. The utilities were under my account, and my savings were tucked away in bank accounts my son knew absolutely nothing about. Vanessa honestly believed she had won the game before it had even truly begun. She mistook my kindness for weakness as she took a triumphant sip of her tea. I made my first quiet decision. It was time to completely change the rules of the game without giving them a single heads up. I grabbed my purse and walked out of the kitchen without a word, ready to take the first step. The very next morning, my first order of business was getting new locks for my master bedroom and the small home office upstairs. A local locksmith out in the suburbs handled it quickly. And I actually installed the deadbolts myself while Vanessa was out grocery shopping and Austin was at work. When Vanessa came upstairs later that afternoon, trying to bring my folded laundry into my room without asking, she rattled the doorknob in vain. She marched straight down the stairs, visibly annoyed, and confronted me in the hallway. "Why is your bedroom locked? We live here as a family. Don't we share everything?" she demanded, her voice sharp. I looked her dead in the eye, slipped the new keychain into my pocket, and replied calmly, "My private space stays private. Vanessa, that's not up for debate." Right then, Austin walked through the front door, looking completely helpless as he glanced back and forth between us. His wife expected him to jump in and take her side, but he immediately avoided her gaze. I looked at both of them and laid it out flatly from now on. Everyone was responsible for their own laundry and cleaning up their own messes in the shared living areas. No more free favors, and no more picking up after them. Vanessa let out a nervous laugh and muttered something about me becoming incredibly selfish. I just let the comment slide right off me, turned around, and walked out into the backyard. They still thought this was just a temporary phase I was going through. They had no idea I was just starting to draw the boundaries they were going to miss so terribly. That evening, I noticed them whispering and scheming in the kitchen. They figured they could punish me by giving me the silent treatment, but they didn't realize my next move was going to hit them exactly where it hurt most, their wallets. Up until that point, I had been covering all the household expenses, the electricity, the high-speed internet, and the gas bill entirely on my own, even though there were 4 of us living under one roof. On Monday, I sat down at my desk and calculated the exact utility costs from the past 3 months. Thanks to Vanessa's marathon showers and the nonstop loads of laundry, the bills had literally doubled. That evening, I printed out a detailed, itemized breakdown and laid it right in front of Austin on the dinner table. Starting next month, I expect $650 on the first of the month to cover your half of the fixed utilities, I said, keeping my tone strictly business. Vanessa walked into the room right at that moment and scoffed loudly. "We moved in here so we could actually save up for our own down payment." "Mother, you have plenty of retirement income. I looked at her without flinching. My retirement doesn't exist to fund your lifestyle. If the money isn't in my account by the 1st, I'm canceling the premium internet plan and turning down the thermostat upstairs. Austin swallowed hard and nodded quickly, desperate to avoid a blowout argument. Vanessa was absolutely boiling because she realized her usual attitude wasn't working. So, she decided to try a new tactic. She told me I was no longer allowed to pick up my grandson, Leo, from preschool in the afternoons. She honestly thought that would break my heart and make me fall in line. I just smiled to myself, gave a quick nod, and said, "Perfect. That gives me a lot more time to focus on my own projects." That threw her completely off balance. She fully expected me to beg or apologize. Instead, I used that free afternoon to call an old friend of mine who worked in real estate. There was a specific plan I'd been keeping in the back of my mind for a while, and the timing was finally perfect to pull the trigger. Over the next 2 weeks, I stuck strictly to my new rules and pulled back almost completely. I only cooked for myself, washed my own clothes, and spent my evenings either in my locked office or out having dinner with my friends. The atmosphere inside the house was so thick you could cut it with a knife. But I completely ignored Vanessa's dirty looks. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Since I was no longer quietly managing the household, dirty dishes started piling up in the sink and the trash can was constantly overflowing. Between her part-time job and dealing with the mess, Vanessa could barely keep her head above water, and Austin was always too exhausted after his shifts to help. A few times, Vanessa tried to subtly hint that she needed help, sighing loudly in the hallway about how overwhelmed she was. I just walked right past her, wished her a wonderful day, and headed out the door. She was slowly losing her grip on a household she claimed she could run so much better than me. One night, I overheard her screaming at Austin in the living room, demanding to know why he wouldn't finally put his foot down with me. Austin just yelled back defensively, saying the house belonged to me and his hands were tied. Vanessa shouted that she couldn't take living like this much longer. Honestly, that was exactly what I wanted. I needed them to face reality. But my most important move was happening entirely outside of that house, that very week. I signed the paperwork for a gorgeous, low-maintenance condo downtown, just 5 minutes away from my closest friends. The funds came from my late husband's life insurance, which I had invested wisely over the years. Nobody had a single clue about my upcoming freedom. On a Saturday afternoon, Vanessa's parents showed up completely unannounced. It was obvious their daughter had called them in for backup to provide some moral support. They were lounging in my living room, acting like they already owned the place, while Vanessa proudly poured them coffee. When I walked into the room, Vanessa's mother cleared her throat loudly and immediately started lecturing about the future of young families. At a certain stage in life, the older generation really needs to step aside and clear the path for the kids, she said. Throwing a very pointed look in my direction, Vanessa smirked triumphantly, clearly thinking this tag team guilt trip would rattle me. I calmly sat down in my armchair, opened my book, and said in a relaxed voice, "I completely agree. That's exactly why young couples need to learn to stand on their own 2 feet instead of freeloading off of others." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Vanessa's father suddenly found his shoes fascinating, and her mother gasped, completely losing her train of thought. Austin shifted uncomfortably in his seat, trying to change the subject as fast as humanly possible. Vanessa glared at me with pure hatred because her little setup had completely backfired. She had hoped to paint me as some selfish, bitter mother-in-law in front of her parents. But my calm, logical response left absolutely no room for an argument. I calmly kept reading my book, took a sip of water, and walked out of the room 10 minutes later. They were finally starting to realize that none of their manipulation tactics worked on me anymore. I was emotionally untouchable. That same night, I packed my vital documents and most cherished family photos into small boxes, quietly loading them into the trunk of my car. Everything was moving forward perfectly, without a single drop of drama. If you enjoy spending time with quiet revenge, we would like to make a small request. Our team works carefully to select, edit, review, and produce each story. While AI tools may assist some parts of the process, every story is ultimately guided and checked by real people who care deeply about the quality of what we share. Since our YouTube monetization is not currently active. Some viewers have asked whether there is another way to support the channel. If you feel comfortable doing so, you can support Quiet Revenge with the cost of a small cup of coffee. Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/Quiet Revenge Family. Ko-Fi, https://ko-fi.com/thestreefamily. PayPal, https://www.paypal.com/paypal/kanhuangmin. Whether you choose to contribute or simply continue watching, we are sincerely grateful for your time, kindness, and support. 2 days later, Vanessa thought she had found the ultimate trump card to finally force me to surrender. She cornered me in the kitchen after dinner, with Austin standing right beside her, looking anxiously at the floor. "If your attitude doesn't change right now, Mother, we are packing up and moving out by the 1st of the month," she announced, crossing her arms. She tilted her chin up with a smug smile, entirely convinced that threatening to take my grandson away would break me into pieces. I looked at her, let the silence hang in the air for a solid 3 seconds, and replied in a steady, unbothered voice, "I think that is a wonderful idea. Let me know how I can help you pack." Vanessa's entire face froze instantly. That smug smile vanished from her eyes in a fraction of a second. She had been banking on tears, guilt trips, or at the very least, me begging them to stay. Instead, I took the only leverage she thought she had and snatched it right out of her hands. Austin looked at me, panicked, and whispered, "Mom, are you serious?" I gave him a warm, reassuring nod. "Of course, Austin. You're grown adults and you need your own space. It's time." Vanessa was so incredibly speechless that she spun around and stormed out of the kitchen without another word. She had completely miscalculated. They both knew the local rental market was incredibly tight and skyrocketing in price. Moving out meant taking on a massive financial burden they honestly couldn't afford right now. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I had made my peace, and the move they intended as a threat had just become my ultimate ticket to freedom. Over the next few days, Austin and Vanessa became remarkably quiet, almost completely submissive around the house. It was obvious they were trying to lay low, hoping I'd just forget about the whole moving conversation and let things slide back to normal. But I used this quiet window to finalize every last detail of my plan behind the scenes. I set up a meeting with a highly recommended local real estate agent right at my kitchen table while the two of them were out at work. We mapped out the listing plan for the house, since our neighborhood was a highly sought-after school district. The agent was completely confident we'd secure a solid, qualified buyer within a matter of weeks. I signed the listing agreement with an overwhelming sense of relief. The house was far too big for me to maintain alone anyway, and the beautiful memories of my husband lived in my heart, not in the bricks and mortar. Simultaneously, I booked a professional moving company for my new condo, scheduling them for the 25th of the upcoming month. I bought moving boxes and hid them safely inside my locked home office where no one else could go. Austin and Vanessa had absolutely no clue what was happening because they were too wrapped up in their own lives. They genuinely thought the storm had blown over and they could keep living rent-free. Vanessa even started slipping back into her old passive-aggressive tone whenever we crossed paths in the hallway. I just let her talk and smiled to myself. He who laughs last, laughs best. And my laugh was going to be incredibly quiet, but life-changing. The final curtain dropped on a completely ordinary Thursday evening, exactly 1 week before my scheduled moving day. I asked Austin and Vanessa to sit down with me at the dining table for a quick talk, noting that I had some important news to share. Vanessa sat down with a dramatic sigh, rolling her eyes, while Austin looked visibly tense. I calmly slid an official letter from the real estate agency across the table, confirming the finalized sale of the property. The house has been sold. The new owners are taking possession on the 1st of the month after next, I announced, my voice entirely even. Vanessa bolted upright so fast her chair flipped backward onto the hardwood floor. "What did you do? You can't do this. Where are we supposed to live?" she screamed, her voice cracking with sheer panic. Austin just stared at the paperwork with his mouth open, completely paralyzed, unable to utter a single syllable. "The deed is in my name. Vanessa, you threatened to move out, and I simply fast-tracked your decision," I replied coolly. Vanessa frantically tried to argue that they needed more time, that they couldn't just be kicked out, and that what I was doing had to be illegal. I gently reminded her that they had never signed a lease, never paid rent, and that I was actually giving them a very reasonable window to find a place. Every single one of her manipulative mind games, her arrogance, and her attempts to push me out of my own life shattered like glass. They were staring down a blank wall, completely unprepared and utterly powerless. I stood up, tucked my chair neatly back under the table, and left them alone to face the music. The next morning, a heavy, almost suffocating wave of desperation hung over the entire house. Vanessa was sitting at the kitchen table with swollen, bloodshot eyes, frantically scrolling through apartment listings on her tablet. Austin came into the living room where I was sitting, looking at me with defeated eyes, trying one last emotional plea. "Mom, how could you do this to us? We're your family. Where are we supposed to go with Leo on such short notice?" he asked, his voice shaking. I felt a quick, momentary pang of sympathy in my chest, but I held my ground. I refused to let them guilt-trip me back into compliance. "Austin, I supported you both for months. And how did your wife treat me in return?" "Like the hired help," I said firmly. I explained to him that for the sake of his own marriage, they desperately needed to be in their own space. I did offer to advance them the security deposit for a new place as an interest-free loan, but only under the strict condition that we sign a formal, legally binding repayment contract. Vanessa overheard the offer, walked into the room, and gave a reluctant nod. She knew they had zero options left. Her arrogant facade was completely gone. She couldn't even bring herself to look me in the eye. Over the next few days, they packed their belongings in total silence. While my movers arrived right on schedule, I watched my furniture get professionally loaded into the truck, and I gave my grandson, Leo, a tight, loving goodbye hug. Austin and Vanessa stood by the driveway, completely humbled by a lesson they wouldn't forget anytime soon. They finally learned that respect is a two-way street. Right now, I'm sitting out on the balcony of my brand new condo, sipping a fresh cup of coffee and soaking in the absolute, beautiful silence. The space is bright, modern, and decorated exactly the way I want it. There isn't a single reminder of the chaos of the last few months. My new chapter has officially begun, and I feel lighter and more at peace than I have in years. The old house closing went perfectly. The funds are safely in my bank account, and I am entirely financially independent. Austin and Vanessa ended up renting a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. It's pricey for them, but it gets the job done. Our relationship now is distant, but perfectly polite. Vanessa is incredibly careful and respectful whenever we speak on the phone these days. There was no big, dramatic family reunion and no tearful apologies. And honestly, I prefer it that way. I get to see my grandson Leo once a week at the park, and I cherish every single second of that time because it's completely free of household tension. I drew my boundaries, stood my ground, and successfully reclaimed my respect and my freedom for the years ahead. When I look back on it now, I can't help but smile a little thinking about that day. Vanessa sat at my kitchen table. She truly believed I was powerless and would just quietly bow to her wishes. She learned the hard way that you should never, ever underestimate a woman who has spent her entire life taking care of business. I look out into the afternoon sun, take a deep breath, and know with absolute certainty that I made the right call. If you enjoy spending time with Quiet Revenge, we would like to make a small request. Our team works carefully to select, edit, review, and produce each story. While AI tools may assist some parts of the process, every story is ultimately guided and checked by real people who care deeply about the quality of what we share. Since our YouTube monetization is not currently active, some viewers have asked whether there's another way to support the channel. If you feel comfortable doing so, you can support Quiet Revenge with the cost of a small cup of coffee. Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/Quiet Revenge Family. Ko-fi, https://ko-fi.com/Thestry PayPal, https://www.paypal.com/paypalm/Kanhuangmin. Whether you choose to contribute or simply continue watching, we are sincerely grateful for your time, kindness, and support.